Our scripture reading this evening is taken from Matthew's Gospel. We are reading from the 26th chapter, verses 20 through 30. Matthew 26, 20 through 30. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "Truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed and began to say to him one after another, "Surely not I, Lord." He answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for him, for that one, not to have been born." And Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." He replied, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Then he took the cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. For this is my blood, the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine, until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. May God bless to our understanding this reading of God's holy word. For more than 2 decades, I have told you that this is my very favorite worship experience of the entire year. Now, surely there must be a reason for that. Now, I must remember a long-standing tradition from my childhood of attending Maundy Thursday services that held great significance in my life. Now, maybe there was just one such experience that stood out so profoundly and affected me so deeply that I very fondly remember that one single experience year after year. I'm sorry, but try as I might, I can't think of anything. I don't really remember attending any worship services during Holy Week, let alone Maundy Thursday service. And I suppose when I first heard the word Maundy, I, like many children and probably adults, if truth be told, thought it was Monday that was being said. And I knew that didn't really make sense because I knew that Maundy Thursday was an awful lot different things. Monday wasn't Thursday and Thursday wasn't Monday. It was only later that I learned how to spell Maundy, and later still that I learned that the word is taken from a Latin word and it simply means mandate. And it was probably sometime after that, after learning how to spell the word and after learning what it means, that I really found out what that specific mandate was that gave this day its name. It's from John's account of the events of this night. And it is the words of Jesus where he says to his disciples, "This is my commandment," or mandate. "This is my mandate, that you love one another as I have loved you." So the mandate of Maundy Thursday is to love one another. But there's more. To love one another as Christ has loved us. So I really have yet to understand why it is that I say this is my favorite worship service of the entire year. No, it certainly isn't the most uplifting service, or the most exhilarating, or the most joyous. Quite the contrary. It is, and it is meant to be, the most somber worship experience of the entire year. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's why it means so much to me. it's here, tonight, that we find ourselves gripped by the reality of the most agonizing night of Christ's life. It is here, in this observance, that we meet him, and he meets us in our deepest pain and suffering. But perhaps there's another reason this night can mean so much to those of us who value it deeply. And perhaps the reason is found in this passage that we have read, and in the question on which we focus tonight. You see, that's what we've been doing all through the Lent season this year. We're looking at questions that people ask Jesus. And more importantly, we are looking at the responses that Jesus offered to those questions. And with all of the others, all the ones that we have looked at so far leading up to this one, the question is really being asked by one person. This one's different. In the upper room, the night before he was crucified, when Jesus announces that one of his 12 disciples will betray him, it isn't one person who asks a question. It's all of them. Is it I, Lord? Now, given our traditional understanding, isn't that rather remarkable? I mean, don't we usually have this picture of Judas as the very obvious villain of the disciples? Though if anyone was going to betray Jesus, surely it would have been Judas, and we know that. So when Jesus says that one of them will betray him, we expect all eyes to immediately converge on Judas. They don't. And in fact, each disciple wonders if he himself is going to be the one who will betray Jesus. Now, not only do they not immediately consider Judas as the betrayer, they don't think that it's going to be one of the others either. And that, to me, is pretty remarkable. And maybe that's why we call them disciples. Perhaps after traveling with Jesus for 3 years, after watching the things that he did and listening to the things that he taught, maybe they did in fact learn a few things from him, like not blaming someone else for something that might be your fault. Phillips Brooks of the little town of Bethlehem fame, I pointed this out more than a century ago, when he said the disciples showed real virtue in asking the question, is it I, Lord? They didn't try blaming one another. Peter didn't ask, is it Philip? Andrew didn't ask, is it Matthew? No one asked, is it Judas? And when Jesus said that one of the disciples would be a traitor, they first looked at themselves and not at their neighbor. Is it I, Lord? Is it I? The asking of the question suggests the reality of the prevalence of sin in the life of every one of us. Now, we are so much like Paul, aren't we? When he cried out in frustration and in despair, for I know that nothing good dwells within me, that is in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. You see, the disciples on this night being honest with themselves, being honest with Jesus, being honest with one another, could not help but ask, is it I, Lord? It is a probing question. A probing question for all of us. It is a question that simply won't let us off the hook. Now, all of that seems so very depressing, doesn't it? And it shows how weak and how frail and how sinful and how evil we are. But I think there's something else that might be learned from this incident. Something else that we might learn from this question. See, when we consider everything that we know about Judas, the one who was in fact the one who betrayed Jesus, now how is it that he was looked upon by the other disciples? And how was he looked upon by those who came later? When the remaining 11 disciples gathered together after the ascension of Jesus to fill the spot after the suicide of Judas. It was Peter who stood up and he said, he, meaning Judas, was numbered among us and allotted his share in this ministry. He was one of us. Now later when Paul is writing to the Corinthians, and you remember he's enumerating the various resurrection appearances of Jesus, and he says that he appeared to the 12 after the resurrection. How is that possible? We think, well, Matthias was chosen to replace Judas, but this was before Matthias was chosen. He's not talking about Matthias. He's not talking about himself, because his conversion, his introduction to his meeting Jesus came later. He must be referring to none other than Judas. He was one of the 12. You see, regardless of his sin, regardless of his shame and his betrayal, he was still one of Christ's disciples. Of course, he was already dead by that time, so I'm not sure how that could have happened, and yet I know the message that is being conveyed. Judas was indeed one of the 12 apostles. But there is still one more element to this question that, to me, is the most striking of all. Now, for a long time, I think I had it wrong. Now, for a long time, as I thought about the order of things that took place on this night, I had the events in the upper room wrong, and it skewed my thinking. But I think getting it right has enabled me to look at Holy Communion in a completely different way. Now, listen once again to some of the words of the passage that we just read. Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." He replied, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took the cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you." Now, do you see what has happened here? Do you see how absolutely stunning this is? For a long time, I had this picture in my mind of Jesus getting ready to serve communion. Now, but before doing so, he wants Judas to leave. And Judas says, "I Lord, bingo, Judas, you're the one. Now, why don't you just get on out of here so the rest of us can do something important, because quite frankly, you don't deserve it." It's not what happens with it. Judas stays. Judas is one of only 12 individuals to receive the very first Holy Communion from Jesus. You look at it in all 4 Gospels. Judas is present. Now that to me is the most astounding part of Judas' story. I think we've been focusing on questions that were asked of Jesus, but more importantly, the answers that Jesus offers in response to those questions. What's his answer here? As Judas asks him if he is the one The answer of Jesus is found more in his actions than in his words. He immediately begins to serve the bread and the wine, his body and blood. His answer to the question of Judas, "Is it I, Lord?" His answer is, "You are still mine, Judas, and I still love you. And this meal is for you. My body and my blood are for you too, Judas." Maybe that's why this service means so much to some of us. It's because of the assurance that it offers of God's abundant grace, infinite love, and unending forgiveness. Even on this night, the darkest of all nights, the love of Christ reaches out to you. God's love will not let you go. Whatever you've done, whatever you might have done, whatever you think you have done, whatever you fear that you might do, that amazing love of God continues to hold on to you, and hold on to you forever. So Jesus invites you, no matter who you are, to come to this table. He invites you to receive his gift of love